Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Trump threatens a 25% tariff on countries who do business with Iran as he promises Iranian patriots that help is on the way. 4 people are dead and power cuts are imposed in Ukraine as Russia launches another missile attack despite ongoing US peace efforts. And fighting for her political future, former far-right French leader Marine Le Pen appears in court attempting to overrule her public office ban. Now, President Trump says countries who do business with Iran will face a 25% tariff on trade with the US as thousands of people are killed in defiant protests. Speaking on Truth Social, Trump told his followers that help was on the way as he addressed Iranian patriots, asking them to keep protesting. According to reports, the US president has been briefed on covert options in Iran after he warned of a potential military intervention. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Managing Director of This Is Dubai, Jabri Pickett, and columnist and correspondent Gemma White. Gemma and Michael, thank you so much for joining me. So, Michael, let's get straight into this conversation and talk about Iran, which has been dominating the news agenda now for a good week or so. The death toll figure is rising in the country. However, we're getting these vastly different numbers coming from different organizations. As we know, there's been an internet blackout. It's very difficult to get any information out of the country. Do we have any idea of what the truth or the true scale is in Iran?
Well, up until about 24 hours ago, you had the Western news organizations, the Wires, Reuters, AP, about 650 dead. And then over the last 24 hours, we've had rising totals, 2,000, in some cases 6,000. And then Iran International, which is an organization that brings together journalists from around the world, trying to investigate as best they can, looking at social media and speaking to government insiders, speaking to sources within the military, witnesses, as well as doctors and nurses, morgues. They've come up with this number of 12,000 dead, mostly from Thursday and Friday night protests. And that's where we stand as of today. Conflicting numbers, but at the very least, everybody will acknowledge at least hundreds, perhaps as many as thousands of protesters have died.
Yeah, and as we said, it's very difficult to get any information out. And I actually have an Iranian friend who was saying to me she lives in Dubai, hasn't been able to contact her family at all for 4 days. We are getting reports today that some people in Iran are now able to call people outside of the country. So slowly we're getting reports of communication coming back inside Iran. But let's turn to the US intervention, because Donald Trump has been on Truth Social today and has also warned Americans living in Iran to leave the country. What more do we know at this stage of any kind of military intervention from the US in Iran? Obviously, we saw it in Venezuela.
It would be, you would look at his post on Truth Social and you would think that perhaps military intervention was imminent, but that's really not the case. There's a disconnect between what's being posted and also what's going on behind the scenes. So Carolyn Levitt on Monday told Fox News that Trump was unafraid to use military force on Iran, although diplomacy remained the first option, which makes perfect sense. But she also said that airstrikes would be one of the many options on the table. So despite these tensions, there's no indication that diplomatic channels have ceased between Washington and Tehran. They're very much open. And Trump and Levitt have both said that conversations going on behind closed doors do not actually mirror the rhetoric that we're seeing in public. So taking all of this into consideration, is there likely to be a full-scale US military operation, boots on the ground? Absolutely not. We haven't seen a build-up in the Gulf of aircraft carriers or strike groups or anything like that. Trump himself has, played quite coy about what he's going to do. Levitt herself has said that nobody knows what President Trump is going to do except for President Trump. The world can keep waiting and guessing. So a lot of ambiguity around there. Now, non-military alternatives seem to be the most plausible here. You're either looking at tactical strikes or you're looking at cyber attacks. But will we see US military intervention? No, I think that's very highly unlikely.
And let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump, because he was on Truth Social today and he said, Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions, which I found really interesting, because if we have a look at the Islamic Republic, we know the institutions, the universities, the schooling system, it all teaches the same documents. Everyone goes off the same learning skills in the country. So the institutions are deeply entrenched in the Islamic Republic. And he also said help is on its way. He has been asked to clarify those comments, the help is on its way comments. He's declined to do that. And he's told journalists, you're going to have to figure that out. But I wonder, do you think that this is, Michael, a direct talk to regime change from Donald Trump, or do you think it's going to be more of an organic movement, to say to the protesters, keep going, and he's waiting for that change to come organically?
This is one of the issues that Iranian analysts struggle with, which is they don't know where the administration stands with the short and long-term challenges that they face when they're dealing with Iran. So, for instance, we do know one thing, excuse me, they don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. After that, though, when we talk about regime change, yes, it could be that. When they talk about wanting to simply protect the protesters, yes, it could be that as well. Any other scenario, it could be that. And this is where Donald Trump leans into that ambiguity, because it can be incredibly frustrating for journalists as we're trying to assess what's going on. But I wonder sometimes if maybe it's not also a little bit disconcerting for the government in Iran, because they're not sure what he actually talks about. He might be saying one thing behind closed doors, and then something else to journalists, and then something else completely differently on social media. And so it leaves them a little bit on off footing, and that, in maybe Donald Trump's art of the deal way, that could be exactly what he's trying to achieve.
And there's also concern, he said to the protesters to keep going, help is on their way. But as we do know, the protesters go on to the streets, Gemma, completely unarmed.
Yeah.
And it's a very different situation to what they come up against. Yeah. So it's almost a cry for keep going, but also what's the implications of that?
Like a rallying cry. And I do think we can't overlook how buoyed he feels by the success or the perceived success of his actions in Venezuela. He's feeling very confident right now in order to, post things like, help is on its way, and to allow for that ambiguity to kind of grow. What we also don't know is what Donald Trump's endgame is for Iran. Is it to bring down the government, in which case there is not an existing opposition ready to take over? And it's not like the US has been backing a separate regime all this time, ready to put some puppet government in place. Chaos, absolute chaos would ensue with this regime toppling. We don't know what the end game is. We do know that the US and Israel would benefit from chaos in the region. It would, I don't know if for them, they're looking beyond the chaos. What comes next? Perhaps the chaos is the end game in itself.
And it's so interesting because I think today we woke up and we saw Donald Trump is putting a 25% tariff on anyone who does business with Iran. And a lot of people are saying it's really interesting because we're seeing this economic collapse in Iran right now, Michael. But a lot of that has been caused by the crippling tariffs that have been put on them and that 12-day war that they had, where we saw Israel and America bomb the nuclear facilities of of Iran. We know Iran is a big OPEC player. It's obviously got lots of oil. And I just found this interesting. I don't know what you think of the tariffs. And right now we're seeing German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in India. We know India is trades with Iran. There's so much happening at the moment.
Yeah, there really is. And when you look at the the protests, and the protests started because of the economic realities of how harsh they are, and that was, I believe, on December 28th. That's when they really kicked off. Yeah. You know, it's 1.5 million reals to $1, and in December, inflation was at 42%. And in October, the Iranian parliament, voted to remove 4 zeros from the real. That's how bad things are right now. And then when you mention the German chancellor being in India, you know, India is one of those countries along with Iraq and the UAE and Turkey and China that trades with Iran. So aside from China, all of those countries are allies of the US. So when Donald Trump slaps a 25% tariff on those countries, he's hurting his allies. And I've said this many times, when there is the absence of a clear strategy, it's frustrating not just for the country that's prepared to take on the punishment of the US, but it's also frustrating for the allies of the United States, because Donald Trump, just by his actions, makes things very unpredictable, which is not what a market wants.
And like you did say, what comes next? Because Ayatollah Khamenei, he's now 86 years old. He's survived protests in the past. The regime and the Islamic Republic have just cracked down, and they've solidified their position even more. And as you say, it's the end game. It's what comes next. And I think those are all the questions that no one really knows the answer to right now.
And I would also say that with what we've learned about what happened in Venezuela, there were apparently talks between the administration and Maduro for him to step aside. So if there are talks going on between certain members of the Iranian government with the US, is there any talk about them looking for an exit strategy?
There has been some talk about that, and that has been on social media. So there is some, not the US directly talking, but there is talk about Ayatollah Khamenei having a route out if it's needed, but that's not being discussed with the US. It's been with other partners of the region, but it's been quite interesting to see how that movement has started already. The chatter on social media, some people might say conspiracy theory, which is always something, as we know, we try not to get too involved in. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. I'm sure we'll be talking about that a lot in the coming days of weeks. Now let's move on to another story. And 4 people are dead and several others are injured following Russia's most intense missile attack of the year. Emergency power cuts have been imposed in Kyiv after severe damage to the city's infrastructure. It's the second attack in 4 days, despite US-led peace efforts, as Russia continues the war, which approaches the 4-year mark. Gemma, so we're now talking about Ukraine, and they have suffered these terrible attacks. What more do we know about them?
So as you said, this is the largest coordinated attack of 2026 so far. I've got to get used to the new year here. The targets were the power grid, which is where Russia has been increasingly focusing its attacks on. Energy infrastructure cities, Kyiv, Kharkiv and Odessa. 4 people killed and many more injured. Now, this has resulted in power cuts across the cities, which has affected hundreds of thousands of families, especially now at the coldest time of year. So Zelensky himself has said the situation in Kyiv region is difficult. 700,000 families are now without electricity. All emergency services are on site. And he also made a call for the acceleration of deliveries that he says the US and Europe have already promised. So he's using this to put a call out. We need resources, whatever those resources may be, and we need them now. So the strikes are obviously making the headlines, and Ukraine has responded. They say they hit a drone factory in the Rostov region of Russia as a retaliatory move. What's making the most headlines here is that for the second time, Russia has used a hypersonic missile. Now, this has drawn particular outrage from Ukraine and European allies because this is seen as a dangerous escalation. And hypersonic missiles can have the capability to carry nuclear warheads. This obviously did not, but the capability is there. So this is an escalation. Russia, it feels like they were never involved in ceasefire talks. Really, it never came to fruition to begin with. It now seems to be completely off the table now that they've escalated with the kind of weaponry that they're using.
And it's really interesting because I was speaking to a guest on my earlier show and he said this is a clear escalation. We see the hypersonic missiles, we're seeing the ramping up of attacks.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I asked him, why do we think we're seeing these and why is the timing so crucial? And he was saying it's interesting because we look at geopolitics. Iran is of course an ally of Russia. Venezuela was an ally of Russia. Syria, when it was under Bashar al-Assad, was an ally of Russia. We then also saw the US, along with support from the RAF in the UK, board that sanctioned oil ship with links to Venezuela with a Russian flag on it. So it feels a little bit like things between the US and Russia are not what people thought they could have actually been.
And I also start to think that Vladimir Putin is seeing all of these players no longer being part of the equation, no longer being pawns that he can use or players who can help him. And he's starting to recognize, maybe I'm in this on my own, and I'm going to stick to my battle plans, and I'm going to push this as far as I can. I'm prepared to keep going. And when we look at what he's doing on the battlefield, you know, he's targeting the power grid. He's targeting the power grid. He's targeting power stations. And even by Ukrainian standards, this is a very cold winter. And he's going to continue, as we've said all along, he doesn't talk to the press. He doesn't go on social media. He just continues to do what it is that he wants to do, which is take more and more land. And nobody is stopping him, except the Ukrainian army when they can. And nobody, the coalition of the talking, as we've discussed, they're not doing enough. Donald Trump's not doing enough. So Vladimir Putin might as well just continue to march forward.
And it's really interesting because we talk about the coalition of the willing, of course, which France and the UK head up together, and they've obviously got loads of different European allies involved in order to try and get momentum on the side of Ukraine. Often we call them the coalition of the talking because they do a lot of talking. But it was interesting because in the FT today, they said the leaders of Italy, Germany, France, Canada and the UK will seek US President Donald Trump's personal endorsement on security guarantees for Ukraine. And remember, we heard from the UK and France who said they would be willing to put troops on the ground if a ceasefire deal...
Everything waiting for the ceasefire
deal
which,
was reached. But then again, Russia's just not been involved in any of this. So, yes, there's been talks between the US, NATO, European allies, but where's Russia been?
Yeah, it was interesting to me as well. The Paris Declaration was described as a declaration of intent. So we've got willing, we've got intent, we've got all these lovely words coming out. But you're right, the people who need to be at the table are not at the table. Have they been invited? I remember last year we talked about perhaps it's good they're not being invited. They've been invited and invited. They haven't come to the table. They haven't brought anything new to the table. So then it was a new policy of, right, we're not going to invite the Russians. We're going to make our own policy with between the coalition, between Ukraine and the US. And now that doesn't seem to have worked either. So at what point have you, played all your cards and you've tried absolutely everything and you have to realise Russia does not, or Putin, sorry, does not want the war to end?
But remember, Donald Trump did have that meeting with Putin in Alaska, and we'll never forget that, will we? But also, the guest I was speaking to earlier, Michael just basically said to me, and what you've touched on here, the peace process is over. There's nothing much to revive anymore.
And it's not just over, it hasn't really begun, because I don't know that a peace process would be in a moving forward stage if one half of the people who have to sign the deal haven't been involved in the process. And that's the situation. We can't even get to the point where the US, NATO, and Ukraine agree on what they want to present to the aggressor.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the biggest challenge. And Vladimir Putin seems to be content, okay, you do your thing. I'm going to keep doing what I believe is going to be in the best interests of my country.
And that has been a big argument, hasn't it? Because we saw the Russian frozen assets, which have been kept in Belgium. The European countries failed to manage to reach an agreement on that and just looked extremely divided. And it seems to have become a difficult foreign policy card to play. But as we were saying, it's freezing cold in Russia and in Ukraine, Russia continuously attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and that has to have a huge psychological effect too on the country.
I think as well what's interesting, just to bring in this hypersonic missile again, that it struck very close to the Polish border.
Yeah.
So this isn't just about, Russia and Ukraine anymore. The border countries must be feeling the pressure as well, which is only going to ramp up the feeling of anxiety that's we've gone into the new year with.
No, absolutely. And we have seen those bordering countries of Russia obviously up their defence spending, at times scramble planes to be able to just make sure their airspace is clear. But yeah, really difficult. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Let's move on now. And the UK is under pressure to block access to Grok following the examples of Malaysia and Indonesia. Elon Musk's AI chatbot allows users to generate images, but has been criticised over its ability to produce sexually explicit deepfakes. The UK Technology Secretary says she would back the move, prompting Musk to accuse the British government of suppressing free speech. So, Gemma, this has been a completely fascinating story that has been rumbling on for a little bit, and we do seem to talk about AI quite a lot right now, but Malaysia and Indonesia are the first in the world to ban the tool over this issue of sexualized imaging. Are they setting a precedent for other countries to basically follow suit?
I think it can set a precedent because they've actually done it. They've seen that this is a problem, and they've done something about it. And actually, the Malaysian government said that they had been issuing repeated notices to X about this issue, about its repeated misuse, but X failed to address the issues and the risks on its platform. And so they've stepped up and they've said, OK, then we're going to issue a ban. So they're actually putting their money, where their mouth is. It can set a precedent, but we have to remember that so many countries don't really even have, regulations or effective regulations in place for the internet and social media, let alone this brave new world of AI, which is coming so thick and fast. I wouldn't even know where you might start putting together laws and regulations, because the second they come into effect, AI has evolved and it's changed. So the action taken by these two, by Malaysia and Indonesia, it does reflect global concerns, absolutely. And so there is a momentum there to start putting regulatory framework in place when it comes to AI. Because the tech companies themselves have not shown themselves to be particularly willing to self-regulate in this respect. So it's up to governments to step in and protect their people. Now, I do think that as you say, we've seen the UK has started to be more vocal about it. The European Union has started to review their compliance as well. India and other countries in Europe, they've also started flagging potential issues when it comes to deepfakes. So do I think it started precedent? I definitely think it started the ball rolling.
And it's so interesting, Michael, because I don't know what your thoughts of it on, but they were saying, why doesn't the UK government, the Labour Party, come off X itself and stop using the platform if it's so anti what Grok is doing? And the argument to that is, well, political parties have so much traction on social media, and that's how they get so many people to follow them and to vote for them and to appeal to the younger audience. So governments are actually in a difficult position here.
So they are and they aren't. They can't get off social media, but I think everybody can get off X. X is the least relevant social media platform.
Elon Musk is not watching.
Let's hope not, because I think he could damage me badly. We live in a world of where we consume content through video and visually. And of course, there are videos and images on X, but it's, at its core, it's still about words. And media, as well as government officials around the world, those are the people, the two industries that are most often on X. But if you, and we can look at the new New York mayor, Mamdani was incredibly attractive and persuasive because he was able to use his videos on Instagram and TikTok. And Donald Trump has talked about the power that Charlie Kirk had to get the youth of the male youth in the States on TikTok voting for him in the last election. So while I think social media, of course, is incredibly important, I was always amazed that the amount of money that Elon Musk would spend, because it's still at its core, it is the least relevant of the platforms, because the majority of people are not on X.
That's so interesting. I'm on X, not that I use it very much, but I find it also quite fascinating that the UK government and Ofcom, which is the regulatory body in the UK, could possibly debate taking on a tech titan like X, because obviously it's this huge multi-billion-dollar company and a government regulator just doesn't have that kind of scope. But also they've gone after Grok, but there's other chatbots out there that do really similar things. So how on earth do people start thinking, is this free speech? How do we keep... This is just a massive debate, isn't there, Gemma?
It's the big difference as well between a country's laws and regulations on free speech, but also what's considered harmful content. And it really is about drilling into what defines freedom of speech and what defines harmful content, and that collision point between the two. And I do find it fascinating that Musk thinks he can tell the UK government what constitutes free speech in a country that he is not born in and he does not live in. So he appears to think, and we saw this before when he was running for, you know, he appears to think that what he says is so vitally important to the conversation. There's just so much ego involved there as well.
And he did back Tommy Robinson, which is something in the UK that's been quite controversial when it comes to Elon Musk.
And the ADF in Germany as well.
Yes, and the ADF in Germany. And it's, you know, Musk has got a history of attacking the UK government over the freedom of speech. But what's Musk's reply been to this? Has Musk been in a bikini?
So Musk has replied the way that you would expect him to reply, which is to take an inappropriate and immature joke at the whole situation. So he has posted himself in a bikini, I think, to sort of show that, in his opinion, this isn't, of course, a very serious issue. And then shortly thereafter, he then did put out a post that was much more serious and much more level-headed, that, you know, posting illegal content of any form is, you know, punishable by us, no matter if it's through Grok and AI or if it's something that is deemed to be illegal content. So he always wants to make a move that is incredibly awkward socially and unexpected. And so you see the picture of him in the bikini and you think, yeah, but we're talking about minors and we're talking about women without their consent being shown in incredibly inappropriate situations, and how can anybody argue that that's not illegal, reprehensible, and should not happen? And yet, he doesn't seem to grasp it, and because he doesn't grasp it right away, and because he puts out a picture of himself in a bikini, he becomes the poster child. And this is the easiest way. So I'm sure Sam Altman is completely comfortable saying nothing about this, which of course they're leaning into it as well. But he's more than happy for Elon Musk to be the face of this and let him face those challenges and the public ridicule, and also, you know, the barbs from the governments as well.
And it is such an interesting debate. Who takes on the regulatory platform here? Is it the tech bros? Is it the government? It's who knows right now. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that story. Let's move on now. When former far-right French leader Marine Le Pen is in court in Paris today as she attempts to fight for her political future. Le Pen was found guilty of embezzling EU funds last year, banning her from running for public office for 5 years. She denies the allegations. However, if the ruling is upheld, she'll be blocked from standing in the 2027 presidential election. Michael, what is at stake here for Marine Le Pen?
So, party success versus personal political survival. If she were, regardless of the outcome of this trial, she has said that, for instance, if she loses, she will not appeal to the highest court. And that's partly because she recognizes that the National Rally, her party, is probably in better hands with Jordan Bardella, who is her sort of tapped successor.
Protégé,
very nice, thank you. In that instance, we see that it would be a wiser move for her to not fight this and for him to run. If she truly believes that she wants what's best for her country and for her party, then the path to success is with her protege. But politicians have egos, and I'm sure because this is, I think, this would be her third election, her third kick at the can, she's determined to become president. And that might not be what's best for the party, and it might not be what's best for her. But she is in this very unique situation where does she have the ability to set aside her ego and put her party first, or is she going to stand there and demand that she be the one that runs for the top spot for her party?
Well, you've got two ladies on this panel, and I think Gemma and I would like to think that us women will put our egos aside for the best person to win or the best person to lead the party. But Gemma, Le Pen and her supporters have framed the original conviction as politically motivated. How significant are these claims?
Well, just going back to your point there, I do find that when women go into politics, they do tend to take on, unfortunately, more masculine qualities.
100%.
And
Hillary
so,
Clinton is a perfect
absolutely.
example.
I think of Margaret Thatcher as well, in order to survive, I guess, in this kind of patriarchal system. But yeah, it would be nice to not think that. But yeah, she's just, I guess, doing what it takes to survive in what is technically still a man's world. How significant are her claims? So they're significant insofar as they've kept her in the headlines, which is what she loves to do. She loves to be talked about. It's her perennial MO, is to stay in the headlines. Now, she's the statements have energized her fan base. We've seen this across the US. We've seen this across Europe. Right-wing leaders making quite big declarative statements in order to rile up, you know, the grassroots fan base as well. So, but her claim that the conviction was politically motivated has also fueled a lot of debate in an election year with a big election coming up. And it's exposed this broader polarization which we are seeing across Europe when it comes to right-wing politics. However, I've looked at quite a few polls across France, and broadly speaking, French voters aren't really falling for it. They don't believe that the conviction was politically motivated in general. They believe that, you know, this is based in law, what she did, you know, the conviction for embezzlement, that kind of thing. So she also has international support. Let us not forget that Donald Trump called the conviction a witch hunt. So she has some very big names in her corner. But I do agree with Michael. I do think it's time to step aside. I think it's time to let this young, fresh blood come in. I do not agree with her politics or the party politics at all, to be honest with you. But it is time for her. We have seen across Europe these younger leaders coming in, They are much more savvy on social media, which we've talked about today. They are appealing to the younger demographic. It's time to step aside.
And I think we can't deny Jordan Bardella's 30 years old. He's made big strides on social media. And there is a populist movement rising across Europe. We see it in the UK when it comes to reform. AfD in Germany, as you mentioned, the National Rally in France. So that upcoming election, which will happen next year, will be really interesting. So thank you so much for that. And finally, we've actually reached that point in the show where Gemma and Michael, they've come up with a couple of quirky stories of the day. Michael, we're going to start with yours because it's all about what was my favourite toy growing up, but now there's a brand new Barbie doll.
So Mattel introduced Barbie in 1959, and it wasn't until 2019 that we had, well, we went 60 years and there were no Barbies with any disabilities. And now what's happened is that Barbie, Mattel has just introduced the first Barbie with autism. This is 6 months after they introduced the first Barbie with type 1 diabetes. And they're trying to do something that is incredibly admirable. So the World Health Organization says that 1 in 100 children deals with some form of autism. And they're trying to create consumers who are able to look around the communities in which they live and see people of different disabilities, but also then see toys, dolls, that reflect the communities in which these children live. So they have introduced this Barbie doll with autism, and everything from the gaze of the child, or of the doll, excuse me, the gaze of the doll is a little bit off because some people with autism might not feel comfortable looking other people in the eye. She has a fidget on one of her fingers, excuse me, and she also is wearing a loose-fitting clothes because some people with autism will not necessarily like, the fabric touching their skin. So they've done the research to come up with something that a little girl will feel comfortable looking at this doll and saying that this is, somebody that I can relate to because some of these issues I deal with as well.
Yeah, I think they need obviously I know all children can play with Barbie dolls, but it's usually targeted towards girls. It would be nice to see boys a sort of a toy. What toys for boys?
Ken. It was Ken doll.
Yeah, Ken.
Ken doll.
Now, for me, growing up
It
in
was
this,
Action Man.
well, for
I
me,
always thought was far better looking than Ken. I couldn't ever understand why Barbie came with Ken when Action Doll was just so much cooler.
She should be dating Action Man.
I remember in the early 70s, 73, 74, I was maybe 6 or 8, and it was Evel Knievel. Do you remember Evel Knievel? Yes. On the motorcycle, and he had the white outfit.
Very cool.
Yes, I can remember the Christmas very well.
I'm still Barbie today, Evel Knievel.
That's the sequel to the Barbie movie.
My Barbie dated the neighbour's Action Man.
Nice.
Oh yeah, that was how it worked.
Okay.
We were no interest in Ken.
No.
He was just a bit bland.
He was.
Anyway, it is interesting, isn't it? Obviously, Barbie moving with the times, and of course, that big Barbie film that came out with Margot Robbie was so interesting. And Gemma, I feel like yours has more questions than answers. It involves a man on a mattress.
It is.
What's gone?
Less worthy. Than your lovely Mattel story. So this is a man who was rescued off the coast of Edinburgh. He was trying to paddle to Cramond Island, and that's an island in the Firth of Forth. Try saying that, it's quite difficult. Now, what he did, he was trying to get across this firth on a blow-up mattress, and unfortunately, he was completely unprepared for the fact that, A, it's absolutely freezing, B, the tides are incredibly unpredictable. C, he was not dressed for the occasion whatsoever. He had no wetsuit, he had no provisions, though he did have a pair of oars, so that will tie into my questions that are just coming up. And when he fell in, which was inevitable, he then realised he was completely unprepared for this crossing and phoned 999, and they had to send the Coast Guard out to get him. Now, here's my questions. Was it a spontaneous sailing? Are you driving along the coast? You've got a blow-up mattress in the back of your car. You're like, oh, weather looks absolutely terrible for a crossing. I know. I'm going to try and get across on my blow-up mattress. And on blow-up mattresses, it says not to be used as a flotation device, you know? And if you've got oars, where is your boat anyway? Where is your kayak or your paddleboard? Why are you attempting this on a blow-up mattress? So it has thrown up more questions than there are answers.
So I think the answer to everything will be found in one word, which is beverages.
Potentially, yes.
I think I've got a deeper question. The RNLI, they save so many lives.
Yes, they
and they do amazing rescue work in the UK, in the seas, and keeping people safe. Like, what a waste of time. What is this man's name? How can I find him? And I think everyone should say to him, you have to now donate money to the RNLI.
He should be invoiced, I think.
I think he should be.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for people doing crazy things, but, you know...
Do it in the summer.
Yes.
Do it in the summer.
Or do it with a friend, something like that, who's got a kayak next to you. But anyway, that's our tip for the day. I just want to say thanks to our guest, Managing Director of This Is Dubai. Of course, that's Michael Jabri Pickett, and columnist and correspondent Gemma White. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, follow us on X. G&T will be coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.